The testimony this week at the Nugent Commission revealed shocking complicity of big multinationals such as Bain, Hogan Lovells, Gartner, and the real power and influence wielded by suspended SARS boss Tom Moyane. It also exposed the lacuna in the organization to fight corruption after the acting SARS Commissioner Ivan Pillay was hounded out without any real foundation. Well, to unpack what happened, we are speaking to Paulie van Wyk. Paulie, good evening. You, of course, an investigative journalist at the Daily Maverick from Skopje. And we are joined in Cape Town by the Director of Open Secrets, Hlengani Mathebula. Hlengani, good evening. Welcome to the debate.
Thank you. Good evening.
And of course, we've got Peter, the Business Day and Sunday Times columnist, my partner in crime. Peter, we're back here discussing the Nugent Commission of Inquiry.
I mean, I think Paulie van Wyk's reporting has been absolutely stunning on this thing, whether it's Gartner or Bain. It's been wonderful. I was invited, and I think, I can't remember, I think, was it Adrian Basson the other day who wrote, or it was, no, I think it might have been somebody else, but wrote about being invited to go and have lunch at Bain, right? Fancy officers, very smooth, Vittorio, whatever his name is, who's now in Italy, apparently.
Yeah, sick.
Too ill to come back.
But Paulie and I have a bit.
You've never seen a fitter looking guy in your life. I mean, he was so smart, so slick, so everything.
And then he
worked out all the time. And you know, I remember the food was good. It was like salmon or something like that. And it was, you know, it was just, when you think back on it, what he did, because he especially, I mean, he plotted with Moyane long before Moyane was appointed, how they were going to stuff up SARS. You know, so that it became less useful. I'm sorry. I mean, and we know it because of you. Thank you. You know, I mean, seriously.
Absolutely. But I want to, because of the role of Bain and because of how big Bain is, I want us to start with Hlengani Mathebula. It's not just Bain, Hlengani. It is KPMG, it's Hogan Lovells, it's Gartner. You've looked at multinationals and you've looked at how they colluded with the old apartheid state, keeping it alive in its dying days. Why is it that they are able to do this, and why do they get away with it? Why do they pay fines? Why do they pay money, but no one actually gets, you know, prosecuted or investigated in any way?
Yeah, thanks, Karima. I mean, I think the fundamental point, firstly, is that we allow them to get away with it. And I think that is the way in which the public responds often to corruption scandals. If it wasn't for Paulie's incisive reporting from the Nugent Commission, I think we wouldn't have as complete an understanding of the role of corporations. And maybe we're slowly starting to awaken to understand and appreciate the role that corporations play in this high-level grand corruption. I mean, as you said, I think the apartheid era is a perfect example of a massive cover-up, if you like, of the role of corporations who profited from a crime against humanity, who were never properly held to account by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's now 20 years since those findings were released. We saw the chiefs of business lining up to the TRC and never really admitting their role. And what we've uncovered since then is a real sense of the economic crimes that many of the large corporations, particularly the banks, were involved in during the apartheid period, in sanctions busting, in moving money around the world, given heightened secrecy, the work of the state security engine. And, you know, we move forward 20, 30 years later, and we see again, we look at the Zondo Commission running parallel to the Nugent Commission. The banks are lining up, and incredibly, Karima, the banks in the Zondo Commission at least argue that they have been shaken down by the Guptas. These are massive institutions who were making a large profit for a long period of time. And when it comes to contemporary state capture, it was only right towards the end that they said, there's a problem here. And I think we would argue that everybody is happy to eat from that trough for as long as there isn't proper probity, and they don't think that there's going to be a tipping point in terms of the political heat. I would argue that that's what happened. I think in the instance of state capture, I think we're starting to see the way which the big corporations are buckling at the Nugent Commission is another example. But there's a history of impunity when it comes to large corporations in our country who for very long have never felt the heat of accountability. And that is not only because we failed them as a public in terms of banging the pots and saying that they need to be held to account, but we've hollowed out our institutions that should have the responsibility to prosecute the executives of those corporations.
Absolutely. Talking about hollowing out institutions, Peter and Paulie, this week we saw, of course, the power that Tom Moyane actually wielded, Paulie. We saw, as Peter said, absolute collusion, Bain going to Moyane before he's even the commissioner to plot how they're going to do certain things. Then you break the Gartner story that just kind of blows the lid off. And of course we had Hogan Lovells trying their very best to pretend that they were involved in a lawful process by essentially holding the number 2 in a position of power, whilst the Financial Intelligence Center actually flagged him as a danger. Just take me through your impressions of the kind of power that Mr. Moyane wielded at SARS and why he was able to actually lure these big multinationals to do the dirty work for him.
I think the first thing to start with, and the most important question that we're faced with, is where did Mr. Moyane derive his power from to wield this enormous amount of say over institutions that would otherwise not have listened to him? And you can see that if you look at everything that happened. We have Bain, now we have Gartner, we have KPMG, and we have Hogan Lovells. All multinationals. They are extremely expensive. They charge millions of rand, if not hundreds of millions of rand, and each is sort of just hidden behind confidentiality the moment that they are being questioned. They were used by Mr. Moyane as the veneer of credibility in order to hide his very interesting decisions. Now, in each of those, there are interesting decisions that he made or that he enforced. With Bain, it was obviously how you could change this SARS beast before he was appointed even. Now we know that Mr. Mazzoni also met with Mr. Zuma on numerous occasions before that. Mr. Mazzoni still says that it's not at Nkandla. We have sources saying I was there with him at Nkandla. But that set aside, he meets with Mr. Zuma, he meets with Mr. Moyane, and then Mr. Moyane becomes the SARS commissioner, and Bain gets a tender that where there's so many red flags at, where it seems as if it's been rigged, where they weren't the most the best, the cheapest option. And then they break SARS in the end. Gartner the same. Gartner appoints a BEE partner that is headed by or was owned by Mr. Patrick Monieki, who is a very good friend and a business friend of Mr. Moyane. And when Gartner gets questioned, Gartner also says, no, we can't talk about this because there's confidentiality issues. KPMG, you see Mr. Moyane actually manipulating investigators and telling them, you will not go and testify or give your version before KPMG. He uses his lawyers, his preferred lawyers, Mudli Mashiani, to initiate a document, and then KPMG blatantly copies and pastes from that document. And then Hogan Lovells, he gets to shield his second in command, the only guy actually who knew anything about tax and about the business of SARS in Mr. Moyane's exco. He gets Hogan Lovells to shield that person, and everyone just says, you know what, we don't know, we didn't try and do anything wrong, we're just doing our job, and in the end we actually we created massive problems.
You see, what I can't help thinking about this is Theresa May, and the link here is very simple. Theresa May got to take Britain out of the EU, right? And she keeps saying, no, we're going to be okay because we export services, and that's what this is what she's talking about. All these things, that all these companies don't make anything. They are just services. They basically service insecurity. They service insecure CEOs, so you get a consultant come in. And so you've got a consultant.
At millions of rands.
That pay is no matter, just make me survive. Because I don't know what I'm doing. And service companies, and I sometimes get annoyed, not annoyed, but a little bit upset when we define service as business. Business is actually also, there's the honorable parts of business, you know, where you make something and you make a good car or a good glass or whatever it might be. These people make nothing. All these people do is bullshit their way through life.
Yes,
basically.
absolutely.
You know,
And I think you put your finger right on it, Peter. They are supposed to be the experts of organizational design and development, and they've actually just hollowed out. I mean, we've seen Bain actually just breaking them down.
I think it might be possible, Paula, you might know better than me, but Bain is potentially culpable under US law for what they've done here.
Yes.
Definitely Gardner as well.
Yeah.
So Gardner and Bain is supposed to actually self-report to the US authorities.
Yeah.
They must be asked that question whether they did.
Because you see, what's interesting, sorry, I won't use up too much time, the profits that they make here get exported.
Absolutely.
As tax. They don't pay tax here.
Yeah. We've got about 4 minutes left for the debate. I want to play a particular bite of someone who was essentially Mr. Moyane's right-hand man, his spin doctor, Luther Labello. He effectively just outmaneuvered and elbowed Adrian Lakay out, who, by the way, today SARS had dropped its defamation case against him. That's the breaking news that we got earlier this afternoon from SARS. But Luther Labello was Mr. Moyane's front man. He came on, defended everybody, was very aggressive, was at the ANC's conference and refused to answer whether he was in fact a delegate. Let's take a listen to him trying to hide behind process and trying to essentially say he wasn't involved.
There was an issue between SARS and the ministry about the payment of bonuses. And Mr. Moyane then sought a legal opinion from attorneys as to, so let me explain. So in SARS, it goes with structure. So you've got EXCO members, you've got group executives, and you've got the bargaining unit. So the question was whether the minister must approve the bonus for SARS employees. And they sought a legal opinion from the attorneys. The attorneys said, no, the commissioner can pay the bonuses without the approval of the minister. And I might not get my facts right here because I didn't know that is the line you're going to take.
Mr. Luther Labello saying, I might not have my facts straight. I mean, he was a terrible witness. He lied. His tongue was tied all the time at the commission. And it was funny to see someone who was such a bully before turn into such a wimp at the end. Hey?
Such a good way to describe that. He's the perfect example of a person who swapped his moral compass for a weather vane. He is the one who bullied Mr. Ivan Pillay, Mr. Adrian Lakay, Mr. Peter Richer, Mr. Yolisa Piquet, many people inside SARS. He pushed out and sort of headed the campaign against these people. Now he wants to tell us that he didn't really know. I mean, in the commission, he was confronted with a document where two SCs, senior counsel, told them that you should not suspend Mr. Ivan Pillay, and he went ahead. And now all of a sudden, he's not sure of his facts, and he doesn't really know. It's absolute nonsense.
Henny, is there a way are there laws that we can make that can hold not just foreign service companies, but all advisory companies to some sort of standard that we can assume that they would, where their behavior could be regulated better and more transparently? I mean, is there a
Peter, I think that's a fine question because, I mean, I think we definitely, I think we need to recognize that we largely have the laws that are in place. There is no need for us, again, to try and create new structures in this country. Our real challenge when it comes to the issue of corporate crimes generally, whether we look at the financial services company, really the corrupt center, which is the City of London, which emanates across the world, these corporations, when they operate in South Africa at the moment, can operate with relative impunity, precisely because even within the NPA, the capacity to tackle complex financial crimes, and we spoke about that earlier, has been hollowed out to the extent that the real experts aren't there, and they certainly aren't sitting in the Hawks as it is at the moment, or aren't necessarily in the leadership positions. I think, the appointment of the National Director of Public Prosecutions is going to be crucial in the next couple of weeks by the President. It's crucial not only to deal with what we see as state capture right now, it's a much broader network of criminality amongst elites in this country that need to be tempered. And if it isn't by the law and the existing structures, then who is going to do it? So I think when we argue, that we are, past capture, we watch Mr. Labello shrivel before the bright lights of the camera. There's a far bigger network that are going to be pushing back in boardrooms across this country and across the globe to ensure that they aren't held to account. And it isn't going to be the Guptas alone. And I think the crucial thing is now refocusing on state capacity to tackle that.
Paulie, you've been looking at some of the structures, you've been interfacing with them. Do we have the capacity to go after these companies, or are they just going to be allowed to obfuscate and get away with things?
We don't have the capacity. If you look at the Hawks, they're struggling to actually keep just one chartered accountant on their books. They must outsource a lot of their work, if not the majority of it.
Are they allowed to outsource some of that work?
Well, they must, because there's no one there. I mean, their economic investigative units and their serious economic units are depleted of people that know how to read the books and how to read the numbers. So how do you expect them to go and look at Mr. Munyeki and find a trail that's often only in cash, that may lead to Mr. Moyane and that may lead to Mr. Makwakwa? It's not an easy task. We couldn't get it because we don't have subpoena powers. But if you investigate that properly and you get the necessary sources, surely it may be possible.
What you want is just one arrest.
Yes.
Just please, just somebody go to bloody jail, or get put on trial and in a court of law.
I think that's probably the best note on which to end this conversation, because we've run out of time. We do need people to begin to be prosecuted, and we need people to go to jail. Henny van Vuren, thank you so very much, Director of Open Secrets, and of course, Paulie van Wyk, excellent investigative journalist that has really just opened this up in such a granular manner from the Daily Mavericks investigative unit from the Scorpions. Well, this is, of course, the fix, Peter. Whilst we were talking about, what's happening at the Nugent Commission, we've just been seeing a statement issued by SARS that they are no longer pursuing defamation charges against Adrian Lekay. Now, of course, he was the spokesperson at the time, and with Mr. van Lochenberg and Mr. Ivan Pillay hounded out.
It was who replaced him.
Exactly. We also see Judge Kroon backing down. Do you think we're going to see more and more of this backtracking here?
Carry on backing down until he falls over a cliff. You know what these people did? I don't know Ivan Pillay very well, and I don't know Adrian Lekay very well, but I do know Peter Richer, and I've known him for 40 years, and he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. I mean, he's a real, true South African and a patriot, and he is as honest as the day is long. And what happened to Pete because of this is just an absolute disgrace, and I can't talk about it without getting emotional, but he didn't deserve that. Adrian Lekay didn't deserve that. I'm glad that all these things are going away, but their lives have been ruined, all these people's lives.
Absolutely, and of course, Van Lochenberg and Ivan is still, under this big cloud.
Yeah, well, Ivan, somebody's got to get him out of that cloud, and basically, if he wants to, ask him to go back and help SARS or help the Hawks. All of these people have got knowledge and experience and integrity, and we should draw them back into the public service.
Absolutely. Now, what was also interesting as a final thing, we know that the finance minister is going to the Zondo Commission, but the minister that's called the enabler for state capture is, of course, Malusi Gigaba. And he took to Twitter last night, setting out what he called an hour to deal with questions about how he wasn't linked to the Guptas. I mean, go through some of the tweets, Peter. I mean, he basically doesn't answer anybody, does he?
No, not really. I mean, look, have you at any point where the MP, this is somebody asking him a question, used your position to unduly influence policy or receive money for personal benefit outside your official mandate? If not, what should be the consequence for you should it be proven that this happened? And Malusi says, no, if I had committed acts of corruption, I should have been arrested, prosecuted, and imprisoned.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of evasive. I thought it was a silly thing to do.
Yeah.
It's basically...
He's trying to be clever.
On one hand, you've got Cyril Ramaphosa saying, please, can we just speak with one voice? And on the other hand, these guys are now running their own sort of publicity campaigns Look, he's under pressure, Malusi Gigaba is, and you can understand why he might want to clear his name. The best thing that could happen to him was to be interrogated, put under cross-examination at one of these commissions. I suggest Zondo should invite him to testify. We do know that the boards of all of the companies, Transnet, Eskom, Denel, were changed by him in one fell swoop in June 2011. And I remember giving some mealy-mouthed explanation for why he had done it. You know, we needed more expertise, but you know, he's never explained why Zola Tsotsi, for instance, would replace him Paul Moyane, who was doing a perfectly good job.
The one thing
why he thought that the chairman of Transnet, whose name escapes me for the moment, needed to be replaced by a fellow who used to work for the DTI, who turned out to be a Gupta screw. Why Salim Essa was appointed to the board of Broadband Infraco by Malusi Gigaba.
Yes. What amazes me, Peter, out of all of this stuff is the fact that 2 Indian nationals were appointed, one at SARS, one at SAA and one at Eskom.
Yeah.
And of course, it appears as if the minister didn't ever know they existed.
Yeah.
How did they know these posts were even available? They weren't internationally advertised.
Yeah.
And it's the one question that the minister has failed to answer.
Well, you do it by turning a blind eye.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, by, you know, the power of association, the power that President Jacob Zuma had.
Yeah.
Well, that's about it for us this evening. Now that you've had your fix, we will see you next Sunday.